I flipped open my journal and put my scaly alien claw to the page, taking my first deep breath of polluted Earth air as I prepared to write about my harrowing mission to save this pathetic planet from complete destruction. The acrid air stung my throat. How these humans tolerated living on such a contaminated rock was beyond me, but the survival of our galaxy depended on uniting with these primitives against the Zorgons, so I steeled myself for the unpleasant task ahead. The United Nations headquarters bustled with activity. As I strode through its halls, I towered over the human delegates, my reptilian features drawing fearful looks. Let them stare. My species held the key to their salvation. I entered the main chamber where Earth's leaders waited anxiously. Their eyes widened at the sight of me and my delegation, the first extraterrestrials they'd seen. I locked eyes with Dennis Russell, the grizzled human diplomat chosen as my reluctant guide. He looked ready to pull his gun if I made one wrong move, a wise precaution. "People of Earth," I began, my translator device making my voice boom. "I am Keela of the Evora. We've watched your species, impressed by your progress. But now, a terrible threat comes for you. The Zorgons sweep across the stars, enslaving all in their path, and your planet is next." Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. I raised a clawed hand for silence. "But hope remains if our kinds unite. I will embed myself among you to assess if an alliance is viable. Your survival and the fate of countless worlds hangs in the balance. We must act now." I came to Earth to determine if humans could help defeat the Zorgons. But as ships filled the skies and cities burned below, one thing became clear. Humanity would need to surpass their potential, and fast, if any of us hoped to survive the coming storm. Despite the tension between us, Dennis and I focused on establishing a line of communication. The man set his jaw and pulled up a seat across from me in the now empty conference room. "Look, I don't trust you as far as I can throw you," Dennis said, "but it seems we've got no choice but to work together if we want Earth to survive this invasion." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the building. Dennis jumped to his feet as a uniformed soldier burst into the room. "Sir, the Zorgon fleet has entered Earth's orbit and opened fire on our outer defenses. Our forces are already taking heavy losses." "I do," I replied, "but I will need access to your military command center to coordinate an effective counterattack." Dennis hesitated for a moment before pulling out his phone. "This is Russell. Give the Evora delegation full clearance now." He hung up and motioned for me to follow. "Let's move." Minutes later, we entered a fortified bunker deep underground. Giant screens displayed satellite feeds of Zorgon ships raining destruction upon Earth cities. I pushed past the gawking human personnel and went straight to the central console, my claws flying across the unfamiliar controls as I worked to interface my own technology. Dennis relayed my plan to his superiors, who quickly agreed. Together, we began coordinating strikes against the incoming Zorgon ships. The humans launched a volley of ICBMs, which I guided through the enemy's defenses with pinpoint precision. Massive explosions blossomed across the hulls of the alien vessels. "Their shields are down. Hit them now," I roared. At my signal, Evora warships emerged from hyperspace on the Zorgon's flanks, hammering them with concentrated disruptor fire. One by one, the enemy vessels cracked and shattered under the onslaught. "It's working," Dennis shouted as the humans in the command center cheered. But our victory was short-lived. The Zorgon fleet quickly regrouped and adapted to our tactics. I watched in horror as fresh waves of ships began descending on Earth's major population centers. "They're launching a ground invasion," Dennis realized with dread. Reports flooded in of Zorgon shock troops storming through the streets, cutting down civilians and demolishing everything in their path. "Easier said than done," Dennis replied grimly. "Getting countries to cooperate is like herding cats, but you're right, it's our only chance." I placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. "Then we will make them see reason one way or another. Come, we have a planet to save." As we raced out of the command bunker to begin our desperate mission, I noticed Dennis eyeing me with suspicion. I had hoped that fighting side by side would build trust between us, but I could tell the human had not let his guard down. He still suspected that I was hiding something. If he only knew the truth about what the Evora had planned for his world. As the ragtag group of world leaders put aside their squabbles to form a united front, Dennis and Kilar knew they needed a game-changer. The Zorgon fleet still vastly outgunned Earth's defenses. They hatched an audacious plan to even the odds. Kilar procured a set of stolen Zorgon stealth suits and fake identity codes. Dennis assembled a crack team of Special Forces operatives. Together, they snuck aboard a supply shuttle and infiltrated the Zorgon command ship orbiting Earth. The stealth suits got them past the hangar bay. Kilar interfaced with a console and looped the security feeds. They moved through the dimly lit corridors, following Kilar's scanner. "These Zorgons are even uglier up close," Dennis whispered, staring at a patrolling guard. Kilar shushed him as they ducked into an alcove. In the command center, they finally accessed the Zorgon systems. Dennis watched Kilar's eyes go wide. By the gods, the Zorgons aren't the true threat, they're puppets. On the screen, a grotesque creature appeared. The Zyrax, a race of psychic parasites. They've enslaved the Zorgons' minds and bent them to their will. "My God," Dennis said, "they're the ones behind this war." Kilar downloaded everything on the Zyrax and their thralls. Dennis planted explosives on the ship's power core and engines. They slipped away as the charges began to detonate. The Zorgon ship listed and fell from orbit, blazing through the atmosphere. It crashed in the Mojave Desert, throwing up a mushroom cloud of sand and debris. Dennis and Kilar barely managed to flee the wreckage in an escape pod. As they limped away from the crash site, Kilar showed Dennis a data crystal. The Zyrax's secrets, their origins, methods, weaknesses, and the location of their homeworld. With this, we can stop them. Dennis took the crystal with a nod. Just then his radio crackled. "Attention, humans, we are Zorgon resistance, enemies of the Zyrax. We know you fight them too. We have vital information to help your cause. Let us join you." Dennis and Kilar shared a look. Dare they trust these mysterious rebels? Everything rode on their choice. Dennis met Kilar's eyes, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. With a curt nod, he turned to the rebel leader on the crackling radio. "We accept your offer. Send us your coordinates." The Zorgon rebels proved true to their word. A dozen of them arrived at the crash site, their angular features and mottled green skin marking them as Zorgon, but their eyes lacked the glazed obedience of the Zyrax thralls. Their leader, a stocky engineer named Zorax, grasped Dennis's hand in a firm shake. "We are grateful for this chance to strike back at our oppressors. With our knowledge of Zorgon systems and your Evora allies' might, we will turn the tide of this war." Over the next days and weeks, an unlikely alliance took shape. Human soldiers, Evora warriors, and Zorgon rebels worked side by side in secret bases, poring over schematics and battle plans. Engineers from all three species collaborated on new weapons: EMP bombs, disruptor cannons, shield-piercing missiles. Dennis watched a human sergeant joke with a Zorgon rebel as they field-stripped a plasma rifle. The sergeant's eyes no longer held the fear and revulsion Dennis once saw when facing the Zorgons. Now, a grudging respect, even camaraderie, had taken hold. "It's strange, isn't it?" Kilar mused as he joined Dennis. "How quickly enemies can become allies in the face of a greater threat." Dennis nodded. "We're learning to see past our differences, to recognize the individual behind the uniform." Their new arsenal ready, the Allied forces launched a blistering offensive. Strike teams hit Zorgon outposts and supply depots, the rebels' inside knowledge allowing them to slip past defenses and hit critical weak points. Formations of human, Evora, and rebel ships tore through Zorgon blockades, freeing conquered cities. On the ground, Dennis, Kilar, and Zorax led a charge against a heavily fortified Zorgon base. As Dennis gunned down a Zyrax controller, its puppet soldiers collapsed. Kilar vaulted a barricade, his disruptor cannon spitting arcs of blue energy into a Zorgon mech, frying its systems. Zorax hacked into the base's shields and powered them down, allowing the Allied forces to storm inside. With each victory, the Zyrax's grip on Earth weakened. But as Dennis and Kayla stood on a hillside watching the sun set over a liberated city, an urgent message came through. A Cyrax dreadnought had appeared at the edge of the solar system, a vast warship bristling with planet-killing weapons. It smashed through the defensive perimeter around Earth, its first volley of fire reducing satellites and space stations to clouds of debris. In an instant, communications and navigation systems across the globe went dark. The dreadnought loomed in orbit, an extinction-level threat poised to strike at the heart of the resistance. "We have to stop it," Dennis said, his voice hard as steel. "We have to board that thing and take it out from the inside." They assembled their best and bravest, a team of commandos, infiltrators, and demolition experts, with engineers and hackers to sabotage the dreadnought systems. Zorax and his rebel brethren would guide them through the labyrinthine ship. As the strike team boarded a stealth shuttle and rocketed towards the looming dreadnought, Dennis and Kayla shared a look that said more than words ever could. The trust and respect between them had been forged in the crucible of war, a bond stronger than the barriers of species or culture. No matter what awaited them on that dreadnought, they would face it together, united by a common cause and an unbreakable alliance. The shuttle slipped past the dreadnought's defenses and docked in a remote airlock. The strike team disembarked, checking weapons and equipment. Dennis nodded to Kayla and Zorax. "Let's move out. We need to reach the core and set the charges. Watch for Cyrax patrols." They advanced into the bowels of the ship, the rebels guiding them through twisting corridors. The air thrummed with the dreadnought's power, an oppressive weight bearing down on them. A skittering sound warned them a split second before a swarm of Cyrax drones burst from a vent. Insectoid machines the size of dogs, they leapt at the team with razor limbs extended. Dennis opened fire, his rifle spitting armor-piercing rounds that tore through the drone's carapaces. Kayla swept his cannon in a wide arc, a wall of disruptor energy reducing a wave of drones to sparking scrap. Zorax tackled a drone that got too close, crushing its head with his bare hands. The rebel's strength was impressive, but Dennis saw him wince as the drone's acidic blood splashed his arm. They fought their way through the swarm, leaving twitching metal bodies in their wake. But the drones kept coming, an endless tide of disposable soldiers. Zorax consulted a holographic schematic. "There's a service tunnel ahead, lightly guarded. It's a straight shot to the power systems." They sprinted down the tunnel, Dennis and Kayla covering the rear as the engineers rigged the charges. Kayla dropped a Cyrax warrior that lunged from the shadows, his cannon blast leaving a smoking crater in its chest. Dennis shot him a grateful nod, a wordless acknowledgement of the bond between them. They had each other's backs no matter what. The charges set, they raced back towards the shuttle. But as they reached the hangar, a fresh wave of Cyrax elites poured in, plasma lances blazing, the air filled with the stench of ozone and seared flesh. Dennis and Kayla fought side by side, a human and an Evora, two warriors united by a common foe. As they cut down the last of the Cyrax together, their eyes met, a spark of something more than camaraderie passing between them. But there was no time to explore it. They piled into the shuttle and blasted free of the dreadnought, the charge's detonation ripping through the mighty vessel behind them. As the strike team watched the Cyrax ship break apart, burning fragments hurtling through the void, they dared to hope that this victory could turn the tide. But Dennis and Kayla knew their fight was far from over. The Cyrax would return, seeking revenge for this defeat. The only way to end this war would be to take the battle to the enemy's own doorstep, to the Cyrax homeworld itself. Dennis gripped Kayla's hand, the simple gesture speaking volumes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, for the sake of both their worlds. The strike team battled through the last of the Cyrax defenses, plasma bolts sizzling past as they cut down the insectoid warriors with grim efficiency. Dennis and Kayla led the charge, their weapons spitting death, an unstoppable force driven by sheer determination. They burst into the dreadnought's central control room, a cavernous chamber pulsing with malevolent energy. And there, floating in a tank of viscous liquid, was the Cyrax commander. The creature was a nightmare given flesh, a pulsating mass of twisted appendages and glaring eyes. Its form shimmered with psychic power, tendrils of thought lashing out to probe the intruders' minds. "Pitiful creatures," the commander's voice boomed inside their skulls. "You struggle against the inevitable. The Zyrax have guided the destiny of 1,000 worlds, and yours will be no different." Images flashed through their minds. Evora scientists studying Zyrax technology, Zorgon armies conquering in the parasite's name, a web of manipulation spanning centuries. Kellar reeled as if struck, his face contorting in rage. "You used us," he roared. "My people, the Zorgons, all of us. Puppets dancing to your tune." The commander's laughter cut like a blade. "And you will continue to serve as you were designed to. Surrender and embrace your true purpose." Kellar's disruptor cannon roared in response, a lance of energy searing towards the tank. But the commander's telekinetic barrier absorbed the blast, the liquid within barely rippling. "Kill it," Dennis shouted over the din of battle. "We have to take out the core. It's the only way." Kellar nodded, his eyes burning with righteous fury. "Go! I will keep this abomination occupied." As Dennis and the others raced to sabotage the power systems, Kellar charged the commander's tank, firing shot after shot. The barrier flickered and strained, the creature within writhing in anger. Psychic blasts hammered at Kellar's mind, visions of despair and defeat, but he pushed through, drawing on every ounce of his indomitable will. For his people, for Earth, for the dream of a galaxy free from Zyrax control. The power core started to overload, cascading failures rippling through the dreadnought systems. Warning klaxons blared as the ship began to tear itself apart. But Kellar stood firm before the tank, his cannon aimed squarely at the barrier. The commander raged, hurling bolts of psychic force, but Kellar weathered the storm. The disruptor beam punched through the weakened barrier and into the tank. The commander screeched as the energy tore through its body, shredding flesh and shattering bone. The dreadnought buckled and heaved as secondary explosions ripped through its structure. Dennis could only watch in stunned silence as Kellar vanished in a blinding flash, the Evora warrior sacrificing himself to ensure the Zyrax commander's demise. They barely made it to their shuttle before the core detonated, reducing the mighty dreadnought to a cloud of molten debris. The explosion lit the void like a second sun, a flare of hope in the darkness. As the light faded, Dennis bowed his head, grief and gratitude warring in his heart. Kellar had given his life to strike a crippling blow against the Zyrax, to give the Alliance a fighting chance. His sacrifice would not be in vain. In the days that followed, word of Kellar's heroism spread like wildfire through the Allied ranks. Soldiers whispered his name like a prayer, a talisman against the darkness. The Evora, the Zorgon rebels, the humans, all were united in their grief and their determination. Dennis threw himself into the fight with a renewed sense of purpose. He took command of the Alliance, coordinating strikes against Zyrax-held worlds, liberating the enslaved and rallying new allies to the cause. For Kellar, for Earth, for every species that longed to chart its own destiny among the stars. The war was far from over, but now, at last, they had hope, and a leader willing to carry the torch into the darkest night. Dennis clenched his jaw as he pored over the intelligence reports, each word stoking the fires of vengeance in his heart. A secret Zyrax research facility, hidden deep within an uncharted nebula, developing a new and insidious form of mind control technology. If the parasite succeeded, the war would be lost and countless more worlds would fall under their sway. He slammed his fist on the table, the pain a welcome focus for his anger. We can't let them finish this project. We have to strike now, hard and fast. The others in the room, a mix of human, Zorgon and Evora officers, nodded grimly. They all knew the stakes, the price of failure. Dennis turned to Zorax, the rebel leader's eyes gleaming with a shared hunger for retribution. Assemble your best fighters. We'll need their knowledge of Zyrax security systems and protocols. Zorax grunted his assent, his scarred face twisting into a predatory grin. We'll make them pay for every soul they've enslaved. Next, Dennis faced the human contingent, a hardened group of Special Forces operatives. You'll be our muscle. We need your skills and firepower to cut through whatever defenses they throw at us. The soldiers saluted crisply, their expressions carved from stone. They were ready to bring the fight to the enemy, to strike fear into the hearts of the Zyrax. In a matter of hours, the strike team was assembled, a lethal fusion of human ingenuity, Zorgon tenacity, and Evora technology. They boarded a stealthy infiltration ship, its hull sheathed in radar-absorbing materials and its engines masked by gravitational dampeners. As they sped through the nebula, the viewports filled with swirling clouds of gas and dust, shot through with crackling bolts of energy. The pilots wove a daring path through the treacherous asteroid fields, the ship shuddering and groaning with each narrow miss. Proximity alarms blared as Zyrax patrol ships appeared on the scanners, their angular silhouettes bristling with weapons. The strike team held its breath, trusting in their vessel's advanced cloaking systems. Seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, until finally the patrols moved on, their sensors fooled. Dennis let out a tense breath, exchanging a look of relief with Zorax. They pushed deeper into the nebula, following the coordinates gleaned from the intelligence reports. And there, nestled among the asteroids and cosmic debris, lay the research facility, a sprawling complex of dull metal and pulsing energy shielding. Dennis felt a surge of adrenaline as they drew closer, his heart pounding in his ears. This was it, the chance to strike a blow against the Zyrax, to honor Kalar's sacrifice and protect Earth and its allies. The strike team made their final preparations, checking weapons and equipment, steeling themselves for the battle to come. They knew the risks, the likelihood that some of them would not return. But as the infiltration ship docked with the facility, its cutting lasers slicing through the airlock seals, Dennis saw only determination in their eyes, a fierce resolve to succeed no matter the cost. They stormed into the facility, weapons raised, ready to face whatever horrors the Zyrax had in store. But what they found within was beyond their darkest imaginings. Row after row of containment cells lined the walls, each one holding a gaunt, haunted figure. Scientists and engineers from a dozen different species, their minds and bodies broken by the Zyrax's cruel experiments. And there in a cell near the end of the block, a face Dennis recognized with a shock of recognition. Kalar's mentor, the brilliant Evora scientist who had disappeared years ago, presumed dead. The strike team set to work, hacking into the security systems and overriding the cell locks. One by one the prisoners stumbled free, blinking in the sudden light, their faces etched with a fragile hope. Dennis helped Kalar's mentor to his feet, the old Evora's body frail but his eyes still sharp. "We don't have much time," Dennis urged. "We need to get you out of here and destroy this abomination of a facility." As the freed prisoners were ushered towards the waiting ship, the strike team raced deeper into the complex, planting explosives and sabotaging equipment. They worked with a desperate efficiency, knowing that every second counted. Alarms began to blare, the facility's security systems finally detecting the intrusion. Zyrax warriors poured into the corridors, their weapons spitting bolts of searing energy. The strike team fought back with everything they had, human rifles and Zorgon disruptors, taking a heavy toll on the enemy ranks. Zorax led a charge into the heart of the research labs, his rebels hacking and slashing with a fearsome brutality. Dennis and his human soldiers held the rear, covering the prisoners' escape and detonating the explosives as they fell back. The facility shook and shuddered, the air filling with the stench of burning metal and acrid smoke. At last, they reached the airlock, the last of the prisoners safely aboard the ship. But as they prepared to disengage, a shadow fell across the viewports, a looming presence that filled Dennis with dread. A massive Zyrax warship, its hull bristling with weapons, hung in space before them, blocking their escape. It had been waiting for them, anticipating their attack. Dennis felt a cold knot of fear in his gut, knowing that they were outgunned and outmatched. But he pushed it aside, gritting his teeth in determination. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to fail now. They would find a way to break through to complete their mission and strike a blow for freedom. The Xyrax warship opened fire, its cannons blazing with searing light. The infiltration ship shook and bucked, its shields straining under the onslaught. Dennis stared at the viewscreen, watching the enemy ship grow larger and larger, his mind racing with desperate strategies and dwindling options. But he would not give up, not while he still drew breath. For Kayla, for Earth, for the dream of a galaxy free from Xyrax tyranny, he would fight to the bitter end. The Xyrax warship loomed before them, a colossus of twisted metal bristling with weapons. Dennis gritted his teeth as he wrenched the controls, sending their smaller ship diving into the chaotic asteroid field. "We need to split up," he barked into the comm. "Zorax, get the prisoners to the rendezvous point. We'll draw the Xyrax away." Zorax's gravelly acknowledgement crackled back. Dennis glanced at Kayla's mentor, the aged Evora scientist strapped into the seat beside him. "I hope you're ready for a bumpy ride." The Evora flashed a grim smile. "After years in a Xyrax prison, this is nothing." Dennis punched the accelerator, their ship darting between tumbling rocks. The warship pursued, its cannons spitting bolts of plasma that seared past the viewports. He jinked and wove, the G-forces slamming them against their restraints. A near miss rattled the hull, alarms shrieking. "Shields at 20%, the Evora warned. Ahead an asteroid loomed, a craggy behemoth pitted with craters and canyons. Dennis aimed for a gaping cave mouth, their ship barely scraping through. The warship blasted the asteroid's surface, shards of rock pelting their shields. They emerged into a vast hollow within the asteroid's core, a labyrinth of jagged stone. Dennis killed the lights, the shadows swallowing them. Kayla's mentor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the dim emergency lighting. "I have one. A weapon that could end this war." Dennis glanced at him sharply. "What are you talking about?" "A prototype. Something I've been working on for years, in secret." The Evora's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "It can neutralize the Xyrax's mind control, free their thralls. It requires an immense power source, something rare and dangerous." The Evora's gaze turned distant. "The heart of a dying star." Dennis stared at him, incredulous. "You want us to fly into a star?" "Not just any star. There's one in a nearby system, on the verge of going supernova. If we can harness its energy—" A proximity alert cut him off, the Xyrax warship closing fast. Dennis swore under his breath, hands flying over the controls. He had to buy time, keep the Xyrax focused on him. The Evora nodded, fingers dancing over his console. Dennis turned their ship to face the oncoming warship, a dark silhouette against the blazing starscape beyond. "All right, you bastards," he growled. "Let's dance." He threw the ship into a dizzying spiral, the warship's cannons hammering at their dwindling shields. He darted and rolled, using the asteroid's jutting spires for cover. The Evora braced himself as they skimmed a canyon wall, sparks cascading off their hull. "Any more fancy flying like that and we'll be smears on the rocks." "If you've got a better idea, I'm all ears." Dennis yanked them into a stomach-churning loop, narrowly evading a volley of missiles. The warship surged after them, its bulk scraping through narrow gaps, tearing free chunks of stone. Dennis saw an opening ahead, a crevice just wide enough for their ship. He plunged into the crevice, the warship's beams scouring the rock around them. They burst out the other side into open space. "The data's away," the Evora reported. "Zorax confirms they're en route to the rendezvous." "Then it's time to end this." Dennis spun the ship to face their pursuer, the warship filling the viewports. "I'm going to give you an opening. Get to an escape pod." "I'll keep them busy." Dennis met the Evora's eyes, a lifetime of unspoken words passing between them. "Go, make that weapon count." The Evora clasped his shoulder, then staggered towards the rear of the ship. Dennis turned back to the controls, his jaw set. He charged the warship head-on, every gun and missile blazing. The warship returned fire, a storm of destruction sweeping the void. At the last second, Dennis wrenched the ship into a steep climb, the warship overshooting beneath them. He saw a tiny pod eject from their hull, speeding away into the darkness. Then the warship was on him again, cannons hammering his failing shields. Alarms screamed, consoles shattering in showers of sparks. Dennis fought the controls, his ship bucking and shuddering as it tore through the asteroid field. He jinked and rolled, using every scrap of cover, every ounce of skill and luck. But the warship was relentless, a juggernaut of destruction that shrugged off collisions with city-sized rocks. Its beams clawed at his ship, hulling, plating, and venting atmosphere. Dennis gritted his teeth against the G-forces, his vision greying at the edges. He had to hold on by every second he could. The lives of billions hung in the balance. He raced towards a dense cluster of asteroids, the warship close behind. At the last instant he cut power to the engines, his ship drifting dead in space. The warship hurtled past, smashing through the asteroids in a cataclysm of rending metal and shattering stone. Dennis hit the thrusters, the sudden acceleration slamming him back in his seat. All he could do was keep running, keep fighting until the end. He thought of Kellar, of the sacrifices they'd all made, of the slim hope carried in a tiny pod, speeding towards a distant rendezvous. Dennis set his jaw and plunged on into the uncharted depths, the warship's hunting cries echoing through the void behind him. He would hold the line, for as long as it took, no matter the cost. The Xyrax warship emerged from the debris cloud, its hull pitted and scarred, but its weapons blazing with renewed fury. It swept its scanners across the void, searching for its elusive prey. On the tiny ship's bridge, Dennis slumped in his seat, his uniform stained with sweat and blood. Damage reports scrolled across the flickering screens, a litany of failing systems and structural breaches. He reached out with a trembling hand, activating the comm. "Zorax, do you read me?" Static crackled, then the rebel's voice broke through. "Dennis, thank the gods, we've reached the rendezvous. The prisoners are safe. Where are you?" Dennis coughed, tasting copper. "Still in the nebula. The Xyrax are right on my tail." "We're coming back for you, just hold on." "Negative," Dennis said firmly. "You have your orders. Get that prototype to the Alliance no matter what." "But Dennis—" "That's an order, soldier." Dennis managed a strained smile. "Give 'em hell for me." He cut the link before Zorax could argue further. The warship was closing again, its scans sweeping ever nearer. With a grunt of effort, Dennis hauled himself upright, his hands finding the controls. He had one last trick to play, one final gambit. The warship followed, its beams searing past his cockpit. Dennis jinked and wove, his ship darting through gaps barely wider than its wingspan. He plunged into a narrow canyon, the warship's bulk scraping the walls as it pursued. Ahead, the canyon narrowed to a bottleneck, a jagged gauntlet of stone. With a tortured scream of rending metal, the warship ground to a halt, its hull crumpling against the unyielding rock. Secondary explosions rippled along its length, gouts of flame and debris erupting into space. Dennis let out a shuddering breath, his hands shaking on the controls. He'd bought them time, but at a steep price. His ship was coming apart around him, its reactor flickering towards critical mass. He pointed his bow towards open space and hit the afterburners, racing the spreading cracks in his hull. If he could just clear the nebula, maybe he could eject. But then a shadow fell across his viewports, a shape out of nightmare. A second Xyrax warship drawn by the destruction of the first. Its weapons were already glowing with charge, swiveling to target his crippled vessel. Dennis stared into the maw of the enemy's guns, a strange calm settling over him. He had done all he could, fought to the bitter end. The rest was up to the Alliance, up to the brave souls carrying a desperate hope to the stars. He thought of Kellar, of the bond they had forged through fire and blood. He hoped his friend would understand, would know that he had given everything to finish what they started. As the Xyrax's cannons flared with killing light, Dennis closed his eyes, a small smile on his lips. In the end he had made his choice, as Kellar had made his. And he wouldn't have changed it for anything in the universe. As the Zyrax warship shattered into a million pieces behind him, Dennis gunned the engines of his battered ship, racing away from the expanding ball of debris and flame. His hands shook on the controls as he pushed the vessel to its limits, the hull groaning in protest. He emerged from the nebula into clear space, the sudden brightness of the stars making him squint. Scanning the coordinates, he spotted the distant glint of Alliance ships waiting at the rendezvous point. A few tense minutes later, he was docking with the lead frigate, stumbling out of the airlock into the arms of his waiting team. They clapped him on the back, their faces etched with relief and grim determination. "We thought we'd lost you," Zorax growled, gripping Dennis's shoulder. "Glad to see you're still in one piece." Dennis managed a weary grin. "Takes more than a Zyrax dreadnought to put me down. What's our status?" The team quickly brought him up to speed. Alliance intelligence had located the dying star that held the key to powering the prototype weapon, a rare element forged in the crucible of a stellar core on the verge of collapse. But the star lay deep in Zyrax space, surrounded by layers of defenses and patrol fleets. "We've got to get in there and extract that element," Dennis said, studying the holographic star map. "It's the only way to make the weapon operational." "We might have a way," one of the Zorgon rebels spoke up. "Our engineers have developed a new cloaking technology, something that can fool even the most advanced Zyrax sensors." Dennis raised an eyebrow. "How soon can you outfit a strike team?" As the rebel techs worked to modify a squadron of fast attack ships, Dennis gathered his team to plan the infiltration. They pored over scans of the star's defenses, identifying potential weak points and mapping out approach vectors. "Once we're in, we'll have to move fast," Dennis said. "That star could go supernova at any moment. We get in, locate the element, and get out before the whole place goes up." 6 hours later, they were screaming towards the dying star, their ships wrapped in the shimmering cloak of Zorgon stealth tech. They slipped past sensor nets and patrolling warships, the cloaking field bending light and radiation around their hulls. But as they neared the star, the cloaking field began to flicker and waver. The star's intense gravimetric shear was interfering with the delicate technology. "We're close enough," Dennis said. "All ships disengage cloak and raise shields, full power to engines." They burst from concealment, racing towards the churning inferno of the dying star. Immediately, Zyrax ships moved to intercept, disruptor cannons hammering at their shields. Dennis jinked and wove, his guns spitting return fire. The nimble rebel ships slashed through the enemy formations, missiles and plasma beams flashing through the void. They plunged into the star's corona, the shields glowing cherry red as they strained against the hellish heat and radiation. Proximity alarms screamed as solar flares lashed out at them, gravitational anomalies sending them careening off course. Dennis gritted his teeth, wrestling with the controls as he scanned for the rare element's energy signature. There, in the heart of a massive solar prominence, a glimmer of exotic matter. "I've got a lock," he shouted over the comm. "All ships converge on my position." But as they raced towards the prominence, space split apart around them. A massive Zyrax fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the stars vanishing behind a wall of angular warships bristling with guns. "It's a trap," Zorax roared. "They were waiting for us." The Zyrax ships opened fire, a hurricane of destruction that hammered the rebel squadron. Ships spun away, trailing smoke and debris, shields shattering under the onslaught. Dennis felt icy despair flood his veins. They were hopelessly outgunned, caught between the hammer of the Zyrax fleet and the anvil of the dying star. They'd never reach the element in time. And then, in a flash of desperate inspiration, the plan crystallized in his mind. A reckless, suicidal gambit, but their only chance. "Zorax, do you still have those solar cores we rigged as mines?" he shouted. "Dump them into the prominence as close to the element as you can get. We're going to use the star against them." Understanding dawned in the rebel's eyes. "You crazy bastard, I'm on it." The ragged rebel ships swung into action, throwing themselves at the Zyrax fleet with reckless abandon. They wove and dodged through the firestorm, drawing the enemy's guns away from Zorax's ship. Dennis danced his ship through the inferno, plasma cannons raking the shields of a massive Zyrax battleship. The behemoth tried to track him, its guns gouging molten scars across his hull. He saw Zorax's ship flitting through the prominence, weaving between gouts of stellar plasma. One by one, the glowing spheres of the solar mines tumbled into the nuclear maelstrom. "Mines armed," Zorax called. 30 seconds to detonation." "All ships break off and get clear," Dennis roared. The rebel ships disengaged, racing away from the star with every scrap of speed they could muster. The Zyrax fleet, sensing their prey escaping, surged forward, closing in for the kill. Dennis watched the countdown tick towards 0, his heart pounding. The mines drifted towards the heart of the prominence, vanishing into the blinding glare. And then the star convulsed. A titanic shockwave of plasma and radiation erupted from the prominence, a searing lance of hellfire that engulfed the Zyrax fleet. Shields flared and died, hulls melting and shattering like glass. The shockwave raced past the fleeing rebel ships, their shields straining to the breaking point. Dennis felt the bone-jarring impact even through the inertial dampeners, his ship groaning like a wounded beast. And then it was over. The rebels limped away from the dying star, leaving a graveyard of shattered Zyrax ships in their wake. At the heart of the guttering prominence, a tiny mote of exotic matter glowed like a captive star. Dennis sagged back in his chair, his hands trembling on the controls. The toll had been high, the risk staggering, but they had the power source. They had a chance to end this war. And now, with the prototype weapon within reach, they would take the fight to the Zyrax's own doorstep. They would burn the enemy's empire to ash and build a new galaxy on its ruins. As the shockwave raced towards the Zyrax fleet, Dennis gripped the controls of his ship, his knuckles white. He watched the energy pulse slam into the dying star, the surface buckling and collapsing inward. The star shrank to a pinpoint, then exploded outward in a blinding flash. A massive wave of plasma and radiation engulfed the Zyrax ships, their shields flaring and failing under the onslaught. Hulls crumpled and shattered, reactors went critical, and the mighty warship spun away into the void. Nothing more than shattered husks. Dennis punched the thrusters to full, riding the edge of the shockwave as it blasted out from the dying star. His ship shuddered and groaned, alarms blaring as the shields strained to hold back the searing heat. "All ships, jump now," he roared into the comm. One by one, the Alliance ships winked out of existence, jumping to the safety of hyperspace. Dennis's finger hovered over the jump control, watching the wall of stellar fire racing towards him. At the last possible second, he engaged the hyperdrive. The stars streaked into lines, then vanished into the swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace. Behind them, the star finally gave way, exploding into a supernova that lit up the void like a second sun. Dennis sagged back in his chair, his heart pounding. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a crippling blow against the Zyrax. But the battle was far from over. Back at the Alliance headquarters, Kellar's mentor and the rescued scientists worked around the clock, integrating the rare power source into the prototype weapon. They labored with a fevered intensity, knowing that every second counted. As the final adjustments were made, Kellar's mentor called the Alliance leadership together. His face was grave as he delivered the news. "The weapon is ready," he said, "but there's a catch. The power source is unstable, and the containment field will only hold for one shot. We'll have to deploy it at the heart of the Zyrax Empire, where it will do the most damage." Murmurs of concern rippled through the room. To strike at the enemy's core would be to invite certain retaliation, to risk everything on a single desperate gambit. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each leader in turn. "I've seen the horrors the Zyrax have inflicted firsthand. I've fought beside the Zorgon rebels, the Evora, and every other species that has joined our cause. I'm the one who forged the bonds that hold this alliance together. And I'm the one who will take the fight to the enemy no matter the cost." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, the leaders nodded one by one. They knew that Dennis was right, that there was no other choice. "Then it's settled," Kellar's mentor said. "Dennis will lead the strike on the Zyrax homeworld. May the gods be with you, and with us all. As the meeting broke up, Dennis felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Zorax, the grizzled Zorgon rebel, his face etched with concern. "You don't have to do this alone," Zorax said. "Let me come with you, fight by your side one last time." Dennis clasped the rebel's arm, a lump forming in his throat. "I can't ask you to do that, my friend. This is a one-way trip, and you've given enough to this war already." Zorax shook his head. "I've been fighting the Zyrax since before you were born, human. I'll be damned if I let you face them without me." Dennis nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Then I'd be honored to have you at my side." As they walked towards the hangar bay, ready to assemble their team and embark on the most important mission of their lives, Dennis felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. This was what he had been fighting for all these long years, a chance to make a difference, to strike a blow for freedom against the darkness. He thought of Kellar, of the sacrifice he had made to bring them to this moment. He thought of all the brave souls who had given their lives in this war, human and alien alike. Their blood cried out for vengeance, for justice, and Dennis would see that they got it, even if it meant laying down his own life in the process. He squared his shoulders and strode forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The Zyrax had taken everything from him, from all of them. Now it was time to take it back. As Dennis's strike team rocketed towards the Zyrax homeworld, the weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. They were the best of the best, hand-picked by Dennis for their skills, their courage, and their unwavering dedication to the cause. Zorax sat at the weapons console, his eyes hard as he checked and rechecked the ship's armaments. "We're going to make those Zyrax bastards pay for every life they've taken," he growled. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the Zyrax homeworld looming before them like a malevolent eye. Swarms of enemy fighters rose up to meet them, disruptor cannons blazing. "Shields at 50%, the co-pilot reported. Dennis gritted his teeth. "Just keep us in one piece, we're almost there." The ship dove towards the planet's surface, anti-aircraft fire streaking past the viewports. The Zyrax capital city came into view, a sprawling metropolis of twisted metal and pulsing energy. Suddenly, a barrage of missiles slammed into the ship's flank. The hull breached, venting atmosphere and sending the strike team tumbling. "We're hit! We're going down!" the pilot shouted. Dennis hauled himself back into his seat, his mind racing. "Aim for that plaza. It's our best chance." The ship careened towards the city center, trailing smoke and flame. It slammed into the ground, skidding and bouncing across the plaza before coming to a shuddering halt. Dennis kicked open the hatch, coughing on the acrid smoke. "Everyone out! Move, move!" The strike team stumbled from the wreckage, battered but alive. But their relief was short-lived, as Zyrax warriors poured into the plaza, weapons raised. Zorax hefted his disruptor cannon. "Looks like the welcoming committee's here." Dennis grabbed the damaged prototype weapon, his face grim. "Get that thing working," he ordered the tech specialist. "We don't have much time." As the strike team formed a defensive perimeter, trading fire with the Zyrax, the specialist tore into the weapons housing, desperate to repair the damage. Dennis glanced at the chrono on his wrist. The window for a successful detonation was closing fast. If they didn't get the weapon operational soon... He pushed the thought aside. Failure was not an option. They would see this through, no matter the cost. "Fall back," he shouted as a fresh wave of Zyrax bore down on them. "We need to buy more time." The team retreated into the surrounding buildings, using the rubble for cover as they fought a desperate holding action. The streets echoed with the screams of dying Zyrax and the sizzle of disruptor bolts. Dennis ducked behind a shattered wall, his rifle spitting plasma. He saw Zorax go down, a Zyrax bolt punching through his armor. The rebel struggled to rise, his weapon still blazing. "Get that weapon working," Dennis roared. "We can't hold them off much longer." The specialist looked up, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "I'm trying. The power core is fried. I need to bypass the—" A Zyrax grenade detonated nearby, showering them with shrapnel. Dennis felt a white-hot lance of pain as a shard tore into his leg. He gritted his teeth and forced himself upright. They were out of time. He had to make a decision. "Fall back to the ship," he ordered. "Get as many civilians on board as you can. I'll stay and cover you." Dennis clasped the rebel's shoulder. "You have to. The mission is more important than any one of us." Tears gleamed in their eyes, but they obeyed. They knew as well as he did that there was no other choice. As the strike team retreated, herding shell-shocked civilians towards the waiting ship, Dennis limped back to the prototype weapon. The specialist lay slumped beside it, his sightless eyes staring at the smoke-filled sky. Dennis knelt beside the weapon, his hands flying over the controls. He might not be an engineer, but he'd picked up a thing or two over the years. He worked feverishly, trying to ignore the sounds of battle drawing ever closer. Just a few more minutes, that was all he needed. And then a shadow fell across him. He looked up to see the Xyrax Emperor himself looming over him, flanked by his elite guard. "Pathetic human," the Emperor sneered. "Did you really think you could defeat us? We have conquered 1,000 worlds, and yours will be no different." Dennis rose to his feet, the weapon cradled in his arms. "Maybe so," he said, "but we'll go down fighting, and we'll take you with us." He activated the weapon, a brilliant lance of energy erupting from its core. The Emperor's eyes widened in shock and fear as the beam engulfed him, vaporizing his guards in an instant. The Emperor screamed as the energy tore through him, shredding his flesh and searing his bones. And then he was gone, nothing more than a fading echo on the wind. Dennis felt the weapon overloading in his hands, the power core reaching critical mass. He had only seconds left. He looked up at the sky, a strange sense of peace settling over him. He had done his duty, the Xyrax would fall and the galaxy would be free. As the weapon detonated, a blinding flash of light consumed the city, the shockwave racing outward to envelop the planet. And in that moment, Dennis knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The war was over. The nightmare was finally over. And though the cost had been high, the future was bright with hope and promise. Dennis closed his eyes, a smile on his lips as the light took him. His last thought was of his friends, his comrades in arms. They would rebuild, they would heal, and they would remember. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.